This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Changes to the social safety net are affecting food stamps and heating assistance for Vermonters. Later this hour, we'll hear from an Afghan refugee who's working to make sure other refugees can keep getting food and heating assistance. But first, Vermont State Senator Sam Douglas has resigned. He's a Republican from Troy in Orleans County, elected in 2024. Douglas participated in a long-running group chat with about a dozen other young Republicans from around the country. He was the only elected official in the group, which included Gen Z and millennial Republican activists from 5 states. Last week, Politico published their text, which included blatantly racist and antisemitic jokes and statements. After Politico's story broke, state officials and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle called for Sam Douglas to step down, including the Vermont Republican Party. Paul Dame is its chair, and he joins us now. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Well, it's good to be back. Certainly not the circumstances I'd like to be on, but glad to have the opportunity to address this.
Yeah, and we're glad to have you here in studio with me as well. And listeners, you can join this conversation if you have a question for Paul Dame about the Vermont Republican Party and its response to this Politico story. You can give us a call at 800-639-2211. You can also send an email to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. And all that we ask is that since we're talking about political discourse and civility, that we keep it civil today. So, Paul, you issued a statement after the Politico story broke in which you criticized Sam Douglas's participation in this chat, but you didn't call for him to resign. And you said his remarks were not specifically bigoted or racist, though the chat was. That statement was later redacted by the party's executive committee. Do you still stand by your initial statement, or did you make a mistake?
Well, I think as the whole thing was unfolding, everyone made the comment that they felt they could support with the information they had at the time. And I think the important thing is, Sam saw that there wasn't a lot of support for him, that he was, and for what was good for his constituents, he decided to step down. He is committed, as the rest of our Vermont Republicans are, to the issues that he was working for and that we've been working for in the state Senate. And he didn't want to get in the way of moving forward on affordability, better housing options, and public safety. And he felt like it was going to be hard for him to be effective moving forward. And that's part of the reason that he resigned. And we're going to be starting the process this week of talking to people in Orleans County to find a replacement. Luckily, we've got a couple months here before a legislator would have to be sort of ready to jump in the fray, and I think there's a lot of good options for Republicans in that area, including some current and potential former legislators or somebody new. So I think there's a lot to be looking forward to.
So Governor Scott pretty immediately called on Douglas to resign. Scott had endorsed Douglas's run for the state Senate in 2024. And at a press conference last week, Governor Scott said, I'm quoting here, "We should reject any of what we saw in that article. We should reject it out of hand. No tolerance, zero tolerance for that. We're better than that." By not calling on Douglas to resign, Paul, I'm wondering if you feel like you have different views than the governor. Do you see yourself as tolerating a different level of political rhetoric than he does?
That's a good question, and I thought a lot about this question earlier this year. Our congressional representative Becca Balint made a statement about if we don't change immigration policy, we're not going to have anyone here to wipe our behinds, but she used the other word, and I took a strong position on that. I said that was coarse and vulgar language, and I called on her to apologize. I didn't think at that time that it was that poor choice of words merited resignation, and so I didn't call for Becca Balint's resignation at that time, although I certainly had plenty of Republicans who were encouraging me to do that. And so I think that part of what I've been trying to do in my term as chair is try to find what is a standard that we can hold all of our elected officials to, and how do we begin to apply that equally in a nonpartisan way. I think maybe it makes me look back at some of the other examples of we've had Aston County State's Attorney Eva Vekos showed up at a DUI crime scene drunk, and she's still a prosecutor. Democrats didn't call on her to resign. So I think up to this point, I hadn't had that as the standard. Sometimes when the opposing party calls for resignation, it can feel a little politically cheap, and so I think there's going to be a reevaluation of what's the standard for all of our political officers and political representatives, and how do we hold that standard consistent.
I just want to be clear here. Are you saying that Representative Becca Balint's statement about not having people around to wipe our butts, that's an equivalent statement to what was going on in this chat, which included racist terms, compared people to Nazis, misogynistic statements about rape?
So I'm not making any comparison. I'm saying
okay. It sounded
I'm saying that what is the standard that we hold our elected officials to in terms of what they said, not necessarily what's said with the people around them. And I think in Balint's case, it was very clear what she said, what she meant, and an apology was given and was found as an acceptable. And I think there's certainly a case to be made that that's a xenophobic comment. It's a comment against immigrants, that immigrants have a certain place. And
do you think an apology by Sam Douglas would have been an appropriate response for this? Like, do you think he should have resigned?
And I believe in his statement he did apologize for the things that were said, even though he is claiming that he wasn't aware of those things being said at the time, and he read some of those things for the first time in the Political article.
Mm. So, as I said, your statement was later redacted by the executive committee of the Vermont GOP. Do you feel like you and the party's executive committee are aligned? Does the Vermont Republican Party's leadership here in Vermont share the same values?
I think everyone, including myself, strongly condemns all of the things that were being, like, the whole context of what was being said in that chat was inappropriate and does not reflect anything I've ever heard from any Vermont Republican in the state. And I've had very frank conversations with people, and it was something that was completely foreign to me, and one of the reasons that that it was hard to imagine that Sam was even linked on those things.
Yeah.
And I think that's certainly, there's a uniform condemnation of that kind of stuff. And me and even people like Sam have been pushing back against that where they've heard it. And so I think that is where a lot of people landed, that the most important thing was condemning that nature, even though the scope was much beyond what was attributed to Sam.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point, and we've seen all over the country. I think pretty much everybody involved in that has lost the position that they had. Sam was the only one for whom it cost the unelected official position.
Well, let's take some calls here. We have Paul calling in from Hardwick. I see here it's Paul Fix, the editor of the Hardwick Gazette. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, hi there. Paul, this is Paul. I sent you an email a couple days ago, but we've got you here. So I'd love to hear what you in the Republican Party do to vet candidates that don't have any select board or statewide elected office. I know that Samuel Douglas was, I believe, a lister and a justice of the peace, but hadn't had any office, serving the public directly. I wonder, can you share what vetting the party does for
Sure.
candidates?
Yeah. And sorry, as you can imagine, it's been a little busy for me the last couple of days. I did see your email. I was hoping to get back to you after this, but yeah. So we do have a process where we examine at least certainly public statements that are made on social media. There are also background checks that can get done. None of those processes revealed anything about Sam. Sam also ran in 22 unsuccessfully, so he had been vetted by voters at that point. He ran in a contested primary, was successful in that. He ran in a very contested general election, and the people of Orleans chose Sam, and we didn't have any reason to doubt their choice, until last week.
Well, thank you, Paul, for calling in. I do think it's relevant to note here that that Sam Douglas, who we did reach out to before this show, works as a mental health professional in Lamoille County, focused much of his work in the State House on substance abuse recovery. And in his resignation letter, which was a lengthy letter, he wrote that he's received some pretty hateful messages since the story broke, including threats to his newborn baby's life. He cited an online petition to have his child taken away from him. Thinking about that, I was reminded of an email that we got from a listener, Amy in Saxons River, who writes, "I'm cringing at the remarks made by young Republicans in the text chat reported by Politico. I recently attended the Vermont League of Cities and Towns town fair, and the keynote address was about keeping civility in our political discourse. The theme of the presentation was a recognition that we have big problems to solve in this country, and we're not going to solve them by insulting each other and making everything into a polarized question." So my question for you is, Paul, is what role do you see, recognizing that there are many people who have roles in this, but what role do you see the Vermont GOP specifically having in promoting civil discourse and denouncing harmful rhetoric, especially at a time when we see some of that harmful rhetoric being shared by our president on social media?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I hope that's kind of how we elevate this conversation moving forward. I know I had reached out to Vermont Public after Charlie Kirk had been assassinated and saying, look, I don't know what I can do, but I want to be part of a process that elevates the conversation that everyone is having. And part of what I've tried to do as state chair is be judicious in not exaggerating claims about things that Democrats have done or said, to try to keep that within a reasonable I don't want to get into an arms race where somebody said this about my guy, so I got to say something bad about that's just a path to like misery for the voters, and I don't want to go down there. And so I'm certainly open to hearing what listeners have to say. Certainly you can contact the station. I'm sure you guys would be happy to forward stuff to me. I want to participate in bigger conversations like that. I've done that with some folks on another channel and tried to get Democrats to be a part of that too, because it's so much. I think both political parties see that, well, if I only speak, kind of in my own silo, I don't get pushback, and I can't be contradicted. And there needs to be a commitment from everybody involved to say, how do we talk to each other in a way where we can turn the temperature down and we can set a better example? Because I think some of the things that are happening, including folks who are commenting on Sam, or I'm sure there's probably, comments all over the internet of people that have really taken things out of context. And when we make comments outside of community, they're not going to be our best ones. And we don't have a community to help us kind of redirect where those comments should be and help to change our words so that we're changing our thinking. And I think that's an important part moving forward. And I've tried to do everything that I know how. I think part of it too is making sure that we continue to demonstrate a culture of understanding, like really trying to understand what the other person is saying and meaning, rather than you fell into the trap and let me reel it in and make you pay for it. I think that those are things that no one person or one group of people can do, but it's got to be a mindset that's adopted more broadly.
Mm-hmm. Governor Phil Scott now has the authority to appoint a replacement for Douglas's seat. You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that the wheels were just starting to turn about how to find that replacement. Can you explain what the Vermont GOP's role in that, and if you feel like there are folks who already seem to be a natural fit who could represent the Orleans district? Yeah,
I don't know of anyone who's sort of been put forward yet. It's all pretty sudden. But the process will be, we have a county organization. They will hold a meeting. They typically recommend 3 potential candidates to the governor. The governor doesn't have to choose from those 3, but he often does. And he usually appoints someone from the political party of that held the seat before the vacancy. So I'm sure, again, the advantage is there's no rush to this. We've got time. Really, a new senator wouldn't really start serving till January. But there's things like bill drafting deadlines that got to get done. So there's a little bit of time. Nobody has to turn this around in a week. Like if it was May or June, there would be a little bit more urgent. So I think the people of Orleans are going to talk amongst each other, find somebody that they think can represent that district, and I'm sure the governor will appoint someone as soon as he's had a chance to talk to the candidates and find somebody that is a good fit for the people in Orleans.
And lastly, Paul, 2 weeks ago, so before the Politico story broke, the Vermont GOP issued a press release about the party's annual awards.
Mm-hmm.
Sam Douglas was named as a finalist for 2 of those awards, Rookie of the Year and Legislator of the Year. Is he still a nominee?
So the awards have already been given out. He didn't win either of those awards, and those nominees were determined by the legislators. So I had asked legislators, look, you guys know your work better than I do. You're there every day. Who is it that you think deserves recognition for their hard work? And so that's what the legislators had said at those times. And I believe another candidate, Rob North from Addison County, was the winner for that.
Paul Dame is the chair of the Vermont GOP. Paul, thank you so much for coming and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm happy to come back anytime, and we can be happy to come back and talk about something nice for once, too.
All right, let's do it. All right. Coming up, changes to the social safety net are affecting food stamps and heating assistance for Vermonters. You can learn more about what those changes are and what they might mean for you and your family in just a minute on Vermont Edition. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. This summer, the federal government made significant changes to food stamps, also known as SNAP, or more locally as 3 Squares Vermont. As part of those changes, some immigrants, refugees, and asylees who are in the U.S. legally no longer qualify. The changes went into effect October 1st. Now, Vermont had to review all the households with non-citizens to redetermine their eligibility. According to the state, 119 households were impacted by this specific rule change. 86 lost 3 Squares benefits entirely, and 33 others saw their benefits reduced because some members of the household weren't eligible anymore. Some of the folks who were affected came to Vermont from Afghanistan. They fled to the U.S. in the years following the Taliban takeover in 2021. That was the situation facing Ruhollah Aman. He left Afghanistan when the Taliban retook power. He arrived in Burlington last year. Vermont Edition producer Daniela Fierro spoke with him recently.
Ruhollah Aman works for the Vermont Afghan Alliance in Burlington. Like most Afghans in Vermont, he came here as a refugee.
I had nothing at that time when I came to the U.S. No money, like you cannot bring anything from your house. It is a long journey.
Aman has a special immigrant visa. He qualified for one because in Afghanistan, he worked on projects for the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. Institute of Peace. He had to flee after the Taliban takeover in 2021.
Yeah, it is very difficult. Leaving your country and your family, it is very difficult. So it feels like you lost your identity. You lost your family, and you don't know you will be able to return or not, and you will meet them, your family again or not.
When he first arrived, he struggled with sleepless nights. He was always thinking about his country and also about how to make ends meet.
Yeah, on the one side you have assistance, but if it stops and you don't have your job or you cannot afford your rent, the housing crisis here, you cannot afford your food. So it is difficult. You cannot focus. You cannot work.
Now, Aman works as a program officer for the Vermont Afghan Alliance. His job includes helping new arrivals find housing and navigate their new lives.
I work with them like as an interpreter. And, I work with them like finding an affordable apartment for them, close to the office, close to the bus station, close to the market.
Aman shares that when he first arrived, benefits like 3 Squares Vermont were vital to helping him get through his first few weeks in the state. He no longer uses 3 Squares Vermont. When Afghans arrive in Vermont, the plan is to find permanent housing and a job in a period of 2 months. Once they find the job, Aman says they no longer use the program. With the One Big Beautiful Bill, incoming Afghans in Vermont are no longer receiving the help they need.
This program is very beneficial, not only for me, for everyone. They come here with nothing like me.
As he helps settle a new group of Afghan refugees in Vermont, the once promised help is no longer. He says clients are on the program for a short time until they get a job. He's had difficult conversations with newly arrived refugees. He tells me because of the changes made in SNAP, 2 recent arrivals would no longer qualify for food assistance.
They are keep on asking us. They're visiting us. And they're calling and they're asking about the assistance which was available few months back.
Because of these changes to the federal program, Vermont Afghan Alliance launched a $25,000 fundraising campaign. It'll go to covering food costs and other basic needs for new arrivals. They reached their goal within the week. Aman says Vermonters' support will benefit many Afghan visa holders.
This is very good for them. It is beneficial for them, and it changed their life. On the one side, they have the fear of like the financial security, like food insecurity, and on the other side, family problems.
And no matter what the U.S. government does, he will keep working to support fellow Afghans in Vermont.
My hope is to build my new life here and to help the most affected people here.
I'm Daniela Fierro.
Ruula Aman is trying to support other Afghans in Vermont who are no longer eligible for 3 Squares food benefits as of October 1st. With the federal government shut down, more Vermonters could see their food benefits go away next month. Here to tell us more is Vermont public reporter Peter Hirschfeld, joining us from Montpelier. Hey, Pete.
Good to be with you, Michaela.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, as you've reported, the Trump administration recently told states that the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is going to run out of money if Congress doesn't pass a stopgap budget by the end of the month. How many Vermonters exactly could lose SNAP benefits?
The fear right now, Michaela, is that in a worst-case scenario, all 63,000 or so Vermonters who rely on SNAP will see those benefits stop entirely on November 1st. That fear derives from a notice that Vermont got from the USDA about a week ago that said, hey, FYI, if Congress doesn't resolve the budget situation before November 1st and the shutdown is still in place, then we're not going to have the funds necessary to keep SNAP going in the month of November. The Vermont Agency of Human Services has been trying to get more clarity on that notice ever since. Like, does this mean SNAP funding will definitely stop? Might stop? Is there a chance that some funding could come through? But I checked in with officials at AHS this morning to see if they've gotten that clarity, and so far they have no additional information about what might or might not happen come November.
Okay, so the name of the game here is uncertainty.
You got it.
And I know that lawmakers and Scott administration officials discussed all this at a joint fiscal committee meeting last Thursday, which you listened in on, right?
Yeah, so this shutdown is entering its 20th day today, and the potential for concrete ramifications on states is getting more real by the day. And I think it was a sobering moment at that joint fiscal hearing last week for lawmakers to find out just how dicey things are beginning to look as it relates to SNAP, of course, but also some other really important federally funded human services programs that the immediate future, at least, is full of uncertainty because of the shutdown situation.
So exactly how big a program are we talking here, Pete? How much money is funneled into Vermont each year? Do we know?
Well, when you're talking about SNAP, this is the big food security program in Vermont by a long shot. 10% of Vermonters are getting nutrition assistance benefits right now. All told, the program funnels about $200 million annually in food assistance to residents here.
Wow.
If the feds were to cease benefits entirely starting November 1st, that means that about $13 million that Vermonters had been counting on to buy groceries next month won't show up on their EBT cards. And I've been talking to lawmakers and food security advocates who say that if that scenario transpires, it would present, in their view, a true emergency situation.
I should have mentioned, too, if you have questions about these changes to SNAP benefits or if they're going to affect you and your family, give us a call at 800-639-2211. You can also email us at Vermont Edition at vermontpublic.org. Lisa in Williston wrote in to say, cutting SNAP benefits for families that helped our U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan is a dishonor. These families need support to start a new life here. Studies show they pay back their initial support to the community in many ways, restore their SNAP benefits. So again, that comment is referring to a previous change that occurred to the SNAP program that's separate from what's coming with the what could be coming with the federal government shutdown. And speaking of the shutdown, Pete, you also reported that the government might shut down a key part of the electronic system that literally powers the EBT cards, the electronic benefit cards. What exactly is happening there?
So these EBT cards that SNAP beneficiaries get, they are the means by which federal funds are transmitted to individuals on the program. But in order for those cards to function at the retail level, the federal government has to transmit data to the national vendor that's responsible for making these EBT transactions go through. Last week, USDA told states that if federal funding for SNAP gets halted as a result of the shutdown, then they're not going to submit the data that vendor needs to make EBT cards work. There's one big reason this is so relevant to the conversation that's going on at the state level right now, and that is there's an inclination among both Democratic and Republican lawmakers and the Scott administration, I think, to use state funds in some form or fashion as a bridge to maintain at least a portion of SNAP benefits if federal funds lapse. But Agency of Human Services Secretary Jenny Samuelson told lawmakers that the inability to access those EBT cards might make that impossible, was her word. And so it's just another wrench in the gears as elected officials try to figure out how to keep this machine running.
So even if Vermont stepped in and used state dollars to fund this program, they might not actually be able to load the money onto the EBT cards for people to use.
You got it. And you know, the latest I've gotten from AHS is that there's some question about whether or not the state even could load money onto those cards. Food security advocates say they want the state to, preemptively put a plan in place to get money on those cards. They think that if the federal government did shut down the EBT system, that courts would intervene in relatively short order, and that as soon as a decision was issued, the state funding would be applied to those cards and people would be able to go to the grocery store, get groceries. But they're also talking about the need to figure out a way to ramp up supplies at local food shelves. I mean, there are going to be a lot, if this funding stops, there are going to be a lot of SNAP beneficiaries who have no idea what's going on until they go to buy groceries on November 1st and find out that their cards don't work. Where are they going to go? Local food shelves. And there's a lot of conversation right now about things Vermont needs to have in place if this scenario bears out.
Yeah. Who are the state officials that have decision-making power about that, about like whether or not to allocate funds to these kinds of programs?
So Vermont's citizen legislature is not in session right now,
right.
But there is what's known as the Emergency Board. This is a committee made up of 4 lawmakers and the governor, and they have the authority to make spending decisions when the legislature is not in session. I've spoken with members of that Emergency Board who say they are working to convene an e-board hearing in the very near future to consider some of the financial dilemmas that we've been talking about here, Michaela. I should note that the Joint Fiscal Committee voted unanimously last week, that was a bipartisan vote, in support of using state funding to backfill any food and fuel assistance that becomes at least a temporary casualty of this government shutdown.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up fuel assistance, because that's what we're going to be talking about at the end of this hour. So it sounds like there are other social safety net funds that are in jeopardy right now because of the shutdown, not just food stamps.
Yeah, and the big one is LIHEAP. This is a low-income heating assistance program. It's the primary source of funding to ensure that people who can't afford to fill their heating tanks don't have their houses freeze during winter. Vermont would usually have its annual LIHEAP appropriation from the federal government in hand by now. That's not happened, and it's unclear when or if that money is going to come through if the shutdown persists. Advocates and fuel dealers are sounding the alarm. They say that the LIHEAP fuel deliveries generally start happening in early November, and they say there are a lot of people relying on that assistance who are in a pretty critical fuel situation right now and need to get those tanks filled before the hard freezes start to set in.
Right. Well, before we move on entirely from SNAP, Pete, there's these two reasons why people might have seen SNAP in the headlines recently: the changes to qualifications that went into effect October 1st, the possibility that the federal government shutdown might affect people's ability to access benefits starting November 1st, and then earlier this summer, the Scott administration complied with a request from the federal government to hand over data about all of Vermont's SNAP recipients from the past 5 years. And he had some flack for complying with that request. Do we yet know why exactly the federal government wanted that data?
We know why the federal government says it wants this data, and that is to root out fraud, waste, and abuse in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. A lot of states don't buy that rationale, though. About 20 states filed a lawsuit in July that argues the USDA's demand for this personal data is illegal. They won a pretty significant victory in that case last week when a U.S. District Court judge issued a preliminary injunction that blocks the Trump administration from imposing any financial sanctions on states that have not complied with the demand for that data. And that judge's ruling says that the plaintiff states have a likelihood of winning the underlying case when everything gets resolved. The judge said the Trump administration appears inclined to use that data in ways that violate federal law. The judge also said that the federal government has failed to establish the security protocols that would need to be in place in order to legally permit a data transfer of such scale and scope. Critics of the Trump administration say this request for SNAP data is part of a broader attempt to aggregate a massive trove of the sensitive personal information of Americans, and they fear that it's going to be used to target people with certain immigration statuses or to undermine programs like SNAP.
So, Pete, I know you're not in the predictions game, but tomorrow we're going to be hitting this 3-week mark for the shutdown. How likely does it seem to you that this standoff is going to end before the end of the month?
You're right. I'm not in the prediction game, so I'll go back to the
You don't
reporting
have money
game.
on it? People have got to have money on this.
There were some representatives from Vermont's federal delegation who briefed lawmakers last week on the situation in D.C. They did not sound at all optimistic.
Right.
They said there's been very little change in the negotiating dynamic or lack thereof. And the level of uncertainty around politics in D.C. right now has made a lot of elected officials in Vermont feel like the state needs to start preparing in earnest for a shutdown that persists indefinitely.
All right. You heard it here first. Vermont Public Reporter Pete Hirschfeld there in Montpelier. Thank you so much for joining us today, for all your reporting on this.
Thank you, Michaela.
All right, we have to take one more quick break, but be sure to stick around because we're going to be sharing some important information about how to help with paying your heating bills this winter. That's coming up on Vermont Edition. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. As we just heard, the federal government shutdown is putting numerous parts of the social safety net in jeopardy. Vermont has yet to receive more than $22 million in federal funds that it's expecting for the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, known as LIHEAP. As temperatures drop, Joshua Davis is readying himself and his organization. He's the executive director of the Southeastern Vermont Community Action, or SEVCA. They support people living in poverty in Windham and Windsor counties. Joshua, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So if folks aren't familiar, SEVCA is one of 5 agencies across the state that administers programs for low-income Vermonters. And you all run a couple different programs to help people keep their homes warm and their utilities up and running. Briefly, can you tell us what those are?
Absolutely. And so, yeah, I'm here today representing SEVCA, but also on behalf of the Vermont Community Action Partnership. As you said, we have 5 community action agencies that serve every corner of Vermont. And so, what I hope people think about is when you're thinking about LIHEAP, you're thinking about Vermont's winter heating safety net program. And really, these dollars come to us and come to our communities in 3 different ways. One is the seasonal fuel assistance. And this is the main benefit that pays for heating fuel. And those funds go out usually early to mid-November, and they go directly to fuel dealers. The second way is with crisis fuel. And so as we get into the winter season and folks are having trouble making ends meet and need some assistance filling their tank, then you would access crisis fuel. And finally, we also administer the emergency heat program. And so for homeowners whose furnaces are broken or need repair, they're able to access that program as of November 3rd. And I would just note, in terms of the scale and what we're seeing, this is across the entire state, and the program hasn't started yet. And so for crisis fuel, our sister agency Capstone in the Barre-Montpelier area has already had over 100 inquiries into crisis fuel. SEVCA has 8 households that are on the list for the emergency heat program, and neither of those are unique numbers. Like, we all across the state are getting inquiries, and we have people lined up as soon as these programs open.
And to be clear, which of these programs, if not all of them, which relies on federal funding? And is there state funding involved too?
Yeah, there is some state funding, but really when you think about LIHEAP, it is the totality of those 3 programs. And so we're talking about all of that. The seasonal fuel assistance is in the $15 to $16 million range. Crisis fuel, the community action agencies were able to distribute $2.1 million to across the state of Vermont last year.
Okay. Oh, you testified before Vermont's Joint Fiscal Committee last Thursday. What message did you want to impart to lawmakers?
That there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. As Pete just said, there doesn't seem to be much traction in getting the government opened again. We've been told from the administration that there are contingency programs should the shutdown stretch on. As of yet, we haven't seen details about that. Now is the time that we really need to be planning. We need to be communicating to people that are anxious across the state that rely on this program. And for community action agencies, we hire seasonal help and we start to get things ready. We see a pretty substantial surge in calls once that season opens up. And so we're trying to get things going. So really the time is of the essence right now. I can't tell you how heartened I was by the conversation that the Joint Fiscal had, and I really appreciate their energy and focus on this. And yet, even still, it's uncertain exactly how this is going to unfold in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, you said there was a lot of energy that came after your testimony, but can you say a little bit more about what kinds of response or comments you heard from lawmakers?
The mantra that I heard that sticks in my head is food and fuel, food and fuel. And so that really helps me feel bolstered that, legislators have our back, the administration has our back. And by our, I mean community action agencies, but more importantly, the people that rely on these programs. And so there seemed to be energy in terms of doing what the state can do to activate contingency plans as this is emerging into an emergency issue. And at the same time, as was pointed out previously, it's very difficult in some senses to know exactly what they can do.
Yeah. It's been a warm fall so far, but of course folks want to fill up their heating tanks before a hard freeze sets in. You mentioned that you have folks on the list already, that these community action agencies around the state are already talking to lots of different families. But do you feel like the bulk of movement around like the LIHEAP program, people trying to get on the list, that's going to happen a little bit later in the season?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd like to mention. One is as soon as we see temperatures dip and people turn on their heating systems, we start to get calls. Yeah. And I think, before we go into the LIHEAP season, we do the best that we can with donated dollars. And so we're able to stretch those federal funds in the off season with donated funds. And so if folks are interested in supporting that work that we're doing right now, you can go on to vermontcap.org to find out which community action agency serves your area if you don't know. The other thing that I would say is it's not too late to apply for seasonal fuel assistance. And so if you're concerned, as we're seeing impacts across our economy about how you're going to make it through the winter, you can still apply through DCF. And we encourage people to apply online. For the fuel-only application, it's just 3 pages, and SEVCA and the community action agencies across the state are here to help. And so if you need support in that process, please reach out. And, Vermonters are resilient, Vermonters are strong, but no one can weather a Vermont winter without heat.
If you have questions about heating assistance, call in. 800-639-2211 is our number. We're talking with Josh Davis, the Executive Director of Southeastern Vermont Community Action, or SEVCA. And Josh, I can imagine that the folks who do reach out, who do rely on LIHEAP, are, each story is different, each family is different. But I'm wondering if you could help us kind of get a better understanding of that range. Is there a more typical profile of a person who's going to be really relying on these programs to stay warm?
Sure, I can answer that in a couple ways. I think one is, eligibility for this program. The technical way that it's figured is 185% of the federal poverty level. And so what that equates to in real dollars is that on average for a family of 4, you would qualify if you make just under $60,000. So there's a number of people, scores of people throughout Vermont that would qualify for this program. But what we're seeing more often than not right now are elderly and seniors that are relying on this program. Just last week, we heard from an elderly woman in Townsend. She lives alone. She has a meticulous budget. And so meds, transportation, food is all laid out meticulously. She keeps her thermostat at 60 or below. She layers up with sweaters and blankets, but she can't afford the delivery fee. You have to order 125 gallons, I think, at least to get a delivery to come out. And that's a huge hit on her budget. So she reached out to us to see what we could do to support her. This is shoulder season. We can't access crisis fuel funds, but fortunately there were local resources, a local heat fund that we were able to connect her with. And so I also want to underscore how these local resources are used and support neighbors and how important they are in supplementing the federal funds.
And you mentioned philanthropic dollars helping to fill that gap. Are you talking individuals, or are organizations like SEVCA also changing the way that you fund these programs by applying to more grants, reaching out to foundations, and the way that many nonprofits are kind of changing the way that they operate right now?
Yeah, I would say that definitely we're trying to be as savvy as possible so that we can raise as much money both from the community, and we as Vermonters are incredibly generous. And so I want to thank everybody that supports not only community action agencies, but local community agencies. And yes, we're trying to access foundations, working with vendors and businesses in any way that we can to raise the dollars that we need to support people. Again, we're seeing things are more expensive, and we're not seeing huge changes in additional funds that are coming to us through our traditional grant format.
Oh, SEVCA has a lot of different programs under its umbrella. I mean, we've been talking mostly about heat and utilities, but you also offer housing stability services, financial empowerment services, food access, the 3 squares, weatherization and home repairs. I'm sure there's other things that I'm forgetting. But Josh, so many of these different programs have been going through a similar period of uncertainty in the last couple of months. It's really the buzzword here on Vermont Edition these days. Are there other areas that you think we should also be highlighting as part of this conversation?
Yeah, and I think that's layered. Thank you so much for the question. One of the primary sources of funding that we rely on as community action agencies is called CSBG, Community Services Block Grant. And what we do with those dollars is exactly what I'm talking about here, is to help fill in the gaps in shoulder seasons or with employees that are funded part-time during the year, but we need them year-round. And so it's really foundational, fundamental funding to community action agencies, those dollars are also held up in this government shutdown. We see bipartisan support for CSBG and also LIHEAP, and yet, we're not able to access those funds right now. And so we have a small runway of being able to absorb, not being able to access those funds. But again, that's going to run out pretty quickly as well. We may have to furlough as a partnership. Other agencies may have to furlough employees. We're not getting paid for that. And so it's creating some substantial challenges for us to navigate. I think, if you take a step back, we operate the Head Start program in Windsor County, and Head Start took up a lot of attention early in this administration about the potential of that being cut. So we dealt with uncertainty of Head Start very early on in the year. Fortunately, funding is still flowing for Head Start programs, but we're also seeing the weatherization program, which does tremendous work. If you think about, heating, what we're talking about is LIHEAP here, but we're also weatherizing homes so that we can reduce heating costs and also make people more comfortable in their homes. That weatherization programs are potentially under attack as well.
So what do you think about the longer term future of LIHEAP? I mean, right now we've been talking specifically about how the program could be affected by the federal government shutdown. But LIHEAP, as we've mentioned, was on the chopping block this summer as the federal government was trying to slash its budget, right? Yeah, I really don't know, because the way that it is utilized, it is such a foundational piece to support people getting through the winters. And so it plays a critical role for, like I was saying, a lot of seniors in our community that rely on it, that have strict budgets, that can absorb the $500 tank of oil. And so it's hard for me to imagine what that would look like if we didn't have LIHEAP. And even though we're dealing with the uncertainty and the reality that these programs don't come through, I haven't been able to come up with any good answers to say, what does this look like if we don't have LIHEAP? I think it's incredibly daunting. And there's part that I think is self-protective for me that thinks that we are going to figure out a way, because we need to keep heat in people's homes. It's terrifying to think what that would look like if people don't have the ability to heat their homes through the winter. And lastly, Josh, I'm wondering if you might have any thoughts for somebody who's listening right now who doesn't need to rely on a program like LIHEAP to heat their home, but also isn't in a financial position to, say, make a major donation to an organization like yours to help their neighbors in that way. Are there other ways that people who are kind of in that squishy middle could help out their neighbors this winter?
I think, getting involved as much as possible. And so if you want to volunteer at your local food shelf, if you can volunteer at a community action agency, not everybody has the ability to provide donations, as you were saying, but we'd ask for you to get involved. But also, I think, checking in with your neighbors, seeing how people are doing, and just knowing that there are resources out there. You could potentially be a conduit. We have a lot of proud Vermonters that will struggle before they'll reach out, and a little encouragement sometimes could make a huge difference.
Josh Davis is the Executive Director of Southeastern Vermont Community Action, SEVCA. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today's conversation. But before we wrap up, I want to let you know who we're talking to tomorrow. I'll be joined by two new heads of major institutions of higher learning in our region, Marlene Trump, the new president of the University of Vermont, and Ian Baucom, the president of Middlebury College. And if you have questions for either of these college presidents, especially in this fraught moment that we're in, where higher ed and the federal government are in many ways at odds, please email them to us before tomorrow's show. Our email is vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. And be sure to join us for that conversation with those two new college presidents tomorrow at noon. All right, that is it for today. Our show was directed by Aaliyah Papes. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro are our producers. Our call screener today was Kelly Delorier, and our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.